Hello and welcome to our third practice for black and white charcoal on gray toned paper. Today we're working on our third sphere, and that means that our focus is having smooth transitions. So I want to remind you that this is typically what we are focused on, is accomplishing these smooth transitions so that you don't see sections of value or color when we're fading out. So this is what we're going for, and this is what we're trying to avoid. So I really want you all to take a look at the board and to see that this section right here, this dark triangle, and then this section of gray, and then a section of lighter gray, and a section of the white eyeball. This is what we're trying to avoid. So today I'm going to be giving you some tips to help you blend your values together smoothly. Now, we are going to get started in the same way. We'll spin our paper so we can see the sides of our value scale. We're going to border the outside edges. Then we'll break that in half. And then we're going to divide each of these halves into 3 even sections. So we're just adding our lines to the side here, and then we'll turn it back. Now, we are going to get started with our white. That is how we always begin, is with our white, because we don't want to start with our white, bring in our black, and then hop back to white. We want to get all of our white filled in and taken care of before we continue on. Now we're filling this whole bottom section to be solid, and this is an area where you might end up with a section. So I really want you to focus on slowly lightening your pressure. And that word, slowly, is really important here because we want to have a gradual fade to all the way out to the gray tone. So I have transitioned this, and I want you to take a look up at the board. I have transitioned so that I have one solid section and one area where it's fading out to the gray. Now I'm going to come in with my Q-tip, and I want you to blend in the correct direction. Now, quite often students go up and down along their value scale, but the trick here is to switch that method and to go side to side. And we don't need very much pressure because we don't want to accidentally remove too much of our white. Now, I only used my Q-tip going horizontally across my value scale until I reached this first line, and then I stop because we want to keep this area nice and solid. One thing that I want you to change today in the method that you're doing is we are going to go back for multiple layers. So we're going to go back on top of the white now. So pick up your white pencil once more, and we're going to go back through and make this nice and solid. And then we're going to adjust and see if there's any areas that need a little bit of help transitioning. So if you see a solid line, that is when you would go in and continue. Now I'm going to blend this out once more, and only in that top section of white. And I want to really focus on that fade out to the gray to make sure that it's nice and smooth. Now that we're done with our second layer of white, we're going to come in with our black charcoal pencil, and we're going to fill this top section to be nice and solid. Remember that one problem students face is that they'll think they filled everything in, and it's just got some dust there. So we need to blow away our crumbs to see if there are any spots that we need to continue filling. Now, this first section should be primarily solid. It's going to start fading out as we reach that next line, and we want to have a nice smooth transition out to the gray by the time we reach that second line. Now, that's just meaning the lightest that I can color. Now, we're going to switch to our blending stumps, and remember that you can clean your blending stump off on the side of a piece of paper. You can clean it off on that sanding tool, but you do need to make sure that it doesn't have too much black charcoal to begin with, or else when you complete this step, it may not work. Now, you're going to go across this value scale. Rather than going up and down, we're going across, and we just barely touched the light part of this bottom section. Now, with that little bit of light charcoal, I'm going to bring this down, and we want to fade that out so that it's transitioning into the gray tone. Now remember that the top two and the bottom two are taken up by the pencils. the next one down from the dark is just blending stump, but this one that's next to it should be completely gray toned paper. So we want to make sure that we are leaving that open, and if you accidentally did fill it in, you are welcome to come through with an eraser and you can just lighten up that space to make sure that we do actually have the gray toned paper showing through. Now, like I said, we were working on this blending stump area. We make sure our blending stump is nice and clean, and we're helping that to transition out to the gray tone of the paper. And occasionally there will be a few patches or blemishes, like areas where it's either darker or lighter than the rest of the surroundings, and that's what we're working on perfecting right now. Now, I just barely touched that bottom lightest section to create the blending stump area. Now I'm going to go in and actually blend those values together. So I'm working on blending horizontally across those spaces, and I'm using very light pressure so that I don't accidentally get carried away with taking too much of the dark too far down. Now I'm using very light pressure, and I'm using light circles, just a very light touch, to go through and really help that area to have nice smooth transitions. We're looking to see if there's any patches that we can go in and perfect, and we're looking at the edge where our solid black is transitioning into that lighter gray. So if you see a line here, that indicates you need to go back and continue working. Now, that was our value scale. We are gonna hop over to our sphere next, and we'll begin with our white. So we're gonna go along and make these little highlight lines along the top edge of the paper. I am also going to just kind of give myself some key guidelines here, and I'm gonna go just a smidge beneath the tabletop, and then I'm going to go a smidge above the tabletop. So take a look at where these lines are. Now I'm slightly below the tabletop and slightly above the tabletop, and then I'm just gonna connect those lines to make an eyeball shape. Now we're gonna fill in the top edge of our sphere to be very solid white. And this does require multiple layers typically. So that's why one of our focuses today is really making sure that we hit everything twice. So we're going through for this first pass, and we should be filling this completely solidly. Now, as we work our way down towards the bottom edge of the eyeball, we want to start transitioning and getting lighter. So that means we're pressing lighter with our pencil. And then our last layer around the eyeball is just like a dusting. And we're trying to just help that transition out into the gray. Now for this first pass, I'm just gonna go along the edge of my eyeball, and notice that I'm not gonna blend through it. So take a look up at the board and notice the difference in these motions. I'm not blending through this space, I'm blending along this space. Now, I'm going to take my Q-tip, and we're just working to get rid of any edge. Like we're just trying to make that disappear essentially. We're like erasing that bottom section of the eye. Pretend like you're erasing it, but then as we reach towards the top of the eye, we don't want to take too much of that value, so we're using a light pressure on our Q-tip. So when we want to help it kind of blend out, we use heavy pressure. When we want to keep those values the same or not take away too much, then we use light pressure. Now, you can see that my value kind of goes down a little bit too far, and this is a time when you could come in and use your eraser to help shape the eyeball to be the correct size and location. So I think mine just ended up to be a little bit too large for me to still have gray in between my white and black. Now, I changed the shape, but now I'm going to come back in for my second pass. So let's pick up our white charcoal pencil. We're doing that second pass up at the top, and we're really trying to get that top eyeball space to be so solid. And then we're fading out. We'll come back in again with our Q-tip, and we're blending along this edge and using it like an eraser at the bottom. So we really want to like get rid of that edge. So we're just kind of, and I'll take my finger and like dust along it. That kind of helps remove some as well. And I'm gonna squint my eyes here, and that's like a weird suggestion, but I really want you guys to try squinting your eyes just slightly to tell where the patches are that need just a slight bit more. So you squint your eyes to tell if there's any areas that don't have like a nice fade out, and then we'll continue adding there and blending out. Now that's all the white for our sphere, so we're going to transition into our charcoal now. I'm going to come a little bit beneath the tabletop, and I'm going to start out with a medium, and then I'm stretching, and this is the lightest that I can color with my pencil, and I stretched it all the way across. Now remember that when we're working with our black charcoal, we switch back to our blending stump, and we always begin by cleaning it because we just used our blending stump for our value scale and we ended with the darkest solid black. So we want to make sure we don't start out with too much on our blending stump, and that is going to be a very helpful tip for you as we're working on making smooth transitions that don't have sections like this. So cleaning your blending stump off is really one of the biggest helpful tips that I can give you as we're working on this. Now, we're going to start by coming through on our lightest area. So I'm just barely touching this edge, and I'm gonna use just like the softest touch to fade out. But remember that we want to have gray tone paper between our white and our black charcoal pencil. So I am going to just help this to fade out nice and smoothly before I continue working on my value underneath. Now that that's smooth, I am going to come underneath this value, and we're adding in that little bit of shadow underneath. We do want to keep that highlight just slightly lighter. Now I'm going to continue to clean off my blending stump, and I am going through and just working on smoothing this out. We're looking for any sections. Now I kind of blended all of my black to be kind of the same value here. So I'm gonna come back through with my black charcoal pencil for our second layer. And I'm only adding it on this little right-hand side of the sphere, just a tiny smidge because we don't need much more. Now I'm going to blend that out, but I'm trying to keep like a nice little bit of that transition, and I'm gonna clean off my blending stump, and I'm gonna go along that edge to help it have a smoother transition. Now, at this point, we really need to start paying attention to our reference photo. So I see that this line kind of comes up at more of a slant than what I've got. So I'm gonna bring that up a little bit. I can go back through and erase if I need to. So if I went up too high, which I kind of did go up a little bit too high right here, I'm erasing that out. I'm gonna lighten up my highlight section because I went just a little bit too dark, and that's okay. You can always make these corrections as we continue on. So I'm just smoothing it out over the top of the areas that I erased, and I'm gonna go along that edge to make sure that it's got that super, super smooth transition. At this point, I think I could bring in a little bit more black charcoal. So notice that it is not just like you lay down that first layer and you're done. That is how we began because it was like helping you understand the steps. But now we're really trying to like match this reference photo. We're trying to add multiple layers to make sure that it really does do what we're wanting it to do. We want to make this look like something specific, and that's our goal, is to really focus on doing that. Now, we are gonna come in now for our tape or for the background space. So I'm going to border this area in the background, and to do that successfully, you must turn your paper. I want to see everyone doing this today. Be careful that you're not setting your hand in the charcoal from our previous spheres, so I kind of had to turn this a little bit strangely to make sure that I'm not getting it all along the side of my hand. You could also set a scrap piece of paper on top of this the spheres we've already completed to make sure that you're not smudging. but just turning your paper effectively can work too. Now I'm just turning my paper so that I can see when my pencil is touching, so that I'm coloring on the right side of the line because I am right-handed. We're coming along, and I'm doing a back and forth motion to make sure that I am not like just partially filling it in. And now I'm going to turn this back since I've got my borders, and I'm working on adding in just a little bit of the background with these small circles. I'm trying to keep the texture nice and even. And before I start blending, it is very important at this phase that I blow away the crumbs to see if the texture is the same all the way through before I come in with my blending stump. Because it's much easier to get the texture to be the same at this point than it is to blend it and then try to get it to be the same. So we're gonna go all the way through using those small, tiny circles. We want to avoid leaving like lines or like a direction that you can see we were coloring in. Now, here's the important part. We're gonna blow away the dust, and that reveals the texture underneath. Now, I want you to go back in and check for any spots up against the edges that aren't solid, and check for any spots that maybe have more of an open space than the rest, and fill it to match. Once you've done that, we're gonna create a border with our blending stump. So we're gonna go all the way around and blend this so that it's nice and sharp and crisp. That's what we're going for with this blending method. Now, we're gonna continue our borders. We're gonna go all the way around this space. I'm always turning my paper so that I'm coloring on the right side so that I can see what I'm doing, because my blending stump and my charcoal have a larger end to them. So I need to maneuver around that to be able to see what I'm doing. Now, I'm gonna continue this border around my sphere, and this is especially important because I'm trying really hard to make it a nice crisp edge and to keep my sphere nice and spherical. We don't want to have it look wonky. So now I have gone through and blended out my border, so I'm going to just take my blending stump and fill in the texture in the interior. Now I'm going to take the extra charcoal that I have on my blending stump right now from blending that background, and I'm using it to fill the tabletop. So I'm using the side of my blending stump now, and that helps to eliminate any lines that you might potentially have. And as you're going, you can just continuously pick up some of the charcoal from that area above and use that to continue filling. Now we're trying really hard to get this to be nice and even. That's our goal before we come in for our shadow, is to get our tabletop to be as smooth and even as possible. Now we're going all the way up against the sphere, we're going all the way up against the edges of this box, and we are making sure that the interior doesn't have any lighter patches or darker patches. We want to use the side edge of our blending stump to avoid increasing the line texture that you might get if you worked with just the tip or the point of the blending stump. So we're really focused here on getting this to be nice and even and smooth. So take your time. We want this to be one of your very best, and we're trying to see little improvements as we go, and this might be one that you could get a little bit of improvement in. Now from here, we are going to draw in our shadow, and the shadow starts a little ways back underneath the sphere and has a solid black triangle right at the edge of the sphere. So this should be and stay solid black. So blow away your crumbs to see that you don't have any empty open spaces. And then we're going to create a value scale from here that stretches all the way across and fades out on the side here. Now we're going to come in with our blending stump and going along this edge. So take a look at the direction I'm coloring. Along this edge to help it have a nice fade out. And then we're gonna start on the lighter end and work our way back to that solid black triangle and then stop. We do not blend out the solid black triangle. Now, we can go back through and perfect. We can look for any areas that might be a little crispy or have like some like solid lines that are left behind. So we're just gonna go through and perfect those things. I'll give you a minute or two to kind of finish that up. And thank you guys so much for following along. I know that this is you've done this many times, but I think that every time you try it and every time you hear new instructions, you pick up more and more. And so I feel like as we continue, you guys are just gonna be pros. So thank you so much for following along. That's the end.